Hi, this is Yogesh. In this lecture, we'll talk about a scope of ViewData, ViewBag, TempData and Session. In last lecture, we have already seen how the data is transferred from one controller to view, or I can say one controller to another controller. But in this lecture, we'll talk about how this data get destroyed. Okay, so let's start with the view data and view back. So basically both the data get destroyed when view is rendered or loaded completely. So we have already seen the example, this data management controller. So if you observe over here, we capture the data inside the view data and view back object, and finally we are rendering the view data sample as well as view back sample view. So when that view data sample or a view back sample view rendered completely, at that time only this view back as well as this view data object get destroyed. So the scope of these two objects is up to your target view to be loaded. For a temp data scope, so you know that the temp data get used to pass your data from one action to another action. So right now this temp data get destroyed immediately after its use in a subsequent HTTP request. So no explicit action required. What I try to say that the temp data has very short life and it's able to null when the target view is fully loaded. So in our example, so if you see right now this temp data storing this list of type test information, and we passing the data to another action called page to action. So let's open that page to action over here. So when the temp data get come over here, and if I say add any view, and if this target view get loaded completely, at that moment your temp data get destroyed. So if you pass your temp data from page 1 action to page 2 action, or to page 2 action to page 3 action, but finally when your target view get rendered, at that time only your temp data get destroyed. Temp data internally using a session state, but it destroyed earlier than the session object. The most of the time, if you want to store any validation error message, then we will use the temp data object. You can also persist your temp data by calling keep method after request completion. So let's say if your target view get rendered, and if you still want to keep your temp data object, then we can use a keep method over here. Here we can also disable the temp data using the session state behavior setting. At a controller level, if we set the session state behavior is disabled, then the temp data is not work for us. So a temp data storing the null value. And finally the session scope. For a session scope, if you see in the web config file, we can make the timeout is equal to 5 minutes. So if your website is in idle mode for a 5 minutes, then session is automatically destroyed. You can also explicitly destroy the session using a session.abandon, as well as you can close your browser. So let's see the diagrammatic representation of your scope of every object. If you see the view data and the view back, the scope is only up to your controller to view. So when the view get rendered, your view data and the view back get destroyed. For a temp data, again, if you pass the temp data across your controllers, but finally when your target view get loaded, then your temp data get destroyed, or a scope of that temp data is set to null. And for a session, basically it use across your controllers, so you need to close your browser explicitly, or you can write down the session.abandon property to destroy your session data. Okay, so in this lecture we have covered the scope of ViewBag, ViewData Session and TempData object.
Thank you for watching.